Welcome to the deep dive. You send us the material you're trying to get your head around, and we pull out the key insights, the connections you might miss. Think of it as your shortcut to really digging in.
Yeah, our goal isn't just to summarize. We're trying to help you grasp the core of these ideas and see how they actually play out in the world around you.
And today we're diving into some really interesting material you sent over. Oriol Placase's Entre les ruines del progrès, la Sobirania del Irrellevants. That title alone suggests some big themes, right? Digital sovereignty, how power is shifting online, and, well, where humans fit into all this.
Exactly. It's complex stuff, but we want to, unpack it, find those aha moments, and really connect it back to how you experience life in this digital age.
So the author kicks things off with this really vivid scene. He's on a train reading Geert Lovink's Sad by Design, which looks at the darker side of social media, as you probably know. And he'd skipped his usual carefully curated playlist.
Right, just hit shuffle on a massive old music library he had.
And then, almost like it was scripted, the Police's Every Breath You Take comes on.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That song, so many think it's a love song, but if you actually listen, it's really about, well, obsessive surveillance. Every breath you take, I'll be watching you. It's genuinely quite unsettling.
Which, yeah, as the author notes, fits perfectly with Levink's points about platform surveillance. Every click, every interaction,
Yeah.
it's all tracked. And it's right then on the train with that song playing. He has this kind of epiphany.
He looks out the window, and it's like the glass becomes a screen. The other passengers on their phones seem like, I don't know, profiles drifting in their own feeds. And the song suddenly feels like the soundtrack to the idea that maybe we're not the ones navigating the network anymore.
But the network is watching us.
Exactly. Constantly observing, categorizing, maybe even shaping how we see things without us fully realizing it.
It brings up that really deep, kind of uncomfortable question. If we're not entirely in the driver's seat, what is doing the observing? If our thoughts or reactions are being anticipated, nudged, how much of our digital self is really truly ours?
Precisely. And that sets up the big questions this source tackles. How does this new power system actually function? How does information get distributed and maybe more critically controlled? And ultimately, how does this whole thing shape the reality we perceive day to day? Okay, so let's maybe start unpacking this with the idea of the information war and this concept of social obsolescence.
Yeah, what's really key here is understanding how power itself and conflict have changed. Information is now both currency and the main weapon. The battlefield isn't physical land anymore.
It's digital space.
Right. And the fight is fought with narratives, with micro-targeted messages, and crucially, by shattering our attention spans.
It makes sense. Often the goal isn't even to push one single version of truth, but maybe just to muddy the water so much.
Exactly. To undermine the very possibility of a shared truth. You flood the zone with competing claims, with doubt, and the result is often paralysis. People just throw up their hands. Singer and Brooking hit on this in Like War, how social media itself has become weaponized territory. And the first victim in all this, the author argues, is our cognitive sovereignty. Basically, your ability to think for yourself, to make your own judgments, free from manipulation, especially from this digital environment we're soaked in.
So our desires are being shaped.
Totally, yes. Even the timing, the order of information we see, it's often carefully managed. Technology stops being just a tool we pick up and put down. It's the environment we inhabit, which makes stepping outside its influence incredibly difficult.
And this is where the social obsolescence idea comes in, which sounds concerning.
It is. The argument is that there's a new way of being left behind. It's not just about traditional forms of marginalization anymore. Now you can become, well, irrelevant based on how fast you adapt to new interfaces, how much data you generate, how willing you are to be constantly connected.
So if you don't engage, don't produce data, you just become invisible.
Kind of, yeah. It's less about active exclusion and more like structural negligence. You just don't fit the dominant pattern, the data-driven model, so the system doesn't really see you.
And this must create a huge gap between, say, traditional power structures, people in meeting rooms making decisions, and the people who actually control the digital plumbing, the platform architects.
Absolutely. The source makes a really sharp point here. Once a technology gets embedded, gets widely adopted, trying to fight it head on is almost futile. You can't really uninvent the internet. These digital systems become part of the bedrock of reality.
And the logic of the system itself decides what sinks or swims based on interaction. So if you're not generating data, you're in a way disposable to that logic, like older people maybe, or the digitally excluded, or even tech dissidents who deliberately opt out.
But, and this is fascinating, there's a paradox. In a world where visibility often equals vulnerability, being invisible could actually be a form of freedom. The author talks about the sovereignty of the irrelevant. Maybe true freedom isn't fighting for attention in the digital noise.
But finding it in the shadows, by consciously choosing not to play the game.
Exactly. By existing outside the system's constant gaze. It's a provocative thought.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk memes. The source calls them the new rubber bullets in ideological fights. That's quite an image.
It really is. And what's striking is that their power doesn't come from being true, necessarily. It comes from how fast and easily they spread, how they mutate almost like, well, a virus.
And they're so decentralized, right? Anyone can make one, share one. That bypasses all the old gatekeepers and lets them just sort of seep into how we understand things.
Their simplicity is also huge. In our short attention span world, a quick, punchy meme lands instantly. Trying to unpack it, debunk it, that takes time and effort people often don't have.
We've definitely seen this shaping politics, culture, even actual conflict. Governments, various groups, they've learned how to use memes for psyops, to sow division, to chip away at common ground.
Yeah, the whole game has shifted. It's not just about controlling the message anymore. It's about designing the environment where messages circulate. Algorithms prioritize engagement, and let's face it, outrage and strong emotions get shared like crazy.
And the result is this fundamental shift in how we collectively think.
Yeah.
We've gone from information that was, maybe hierarchical, maybe flawed, but at least tried for verification.
To this chaotic swirl of fragments, competing sound bites. Public opinion gets shaped by whoever dominates these symbolic, meme-driven spaces.
And it affects how we think, not just what we think. That constant barrage of short, sharp shocks, it actually erodes our ability to handle complexity, doesn't it?
It really seems to. Ideas that need time, sustained attention, they start to feel obsolete or just like too much hard work.
It's almost like a war against depth itself. And the worrying thing is we often kind of go along with it willingly because simplification feels easy, fast, immediately satisfying. Critical thinking is effortful.
Definitely. And our capacity for that effort seems to be, well, shrinking. So in this new landscape, the winners aren't necessarily those with the best arguments. They're the ones who can impose their symbols, control the emotional tone, The actual truth can become almost secondary.
The source makes an interesting link here to the Melian dialogue, that old Greek thing about the strong do what they can.
And the weak suffer what they must. Yeah, it highlights that raw power dynamic. Might makes right, digitally speaking.
And Richard Dawkins' original idea of memes, these cultural units evolving, that's been kind of warped, hasn't it? He thought significance would drive spread.
But now it's often just volume, emotional punch, interaction metrics that determine survival, not deeper meaning.
The examples are everywhere, aren't they? The 2016 U.S. election stuff, Hillary for prison, QAnon's whole gamified paranoia, Pepe the Frog's journey, manipulating perceptions around Black Lives Matter, the sheer noise during the pandemic.
Its overload is censorship. You don't have to ban voices if you can just drown them out in a sea of digital noise. The truth might still be out there, but who has the energy or focus to find it?
Which circles back to why that cognitive sovereignty is so vital. Being able to resist the instant emotional hit, piece together your own understanding, push back against oversimplification. In this world, feeling certain often feels better than being right.
It really becomes a discipline, doesn't it? A conscious effort to doubt, to question, and a system that rewards quick affirmation. And, the source points out, most of us are kind of unprepared for that resistance because the system itself conditions us against it.
Okay, let's move to this next big idea. Technology as an invisible environment. That really changes the frame.
Absolutely. It's not just a tool we use anymore. The argument is it's become the atmosphere we live in. It shapes our perceptions, decisions, relationships, often without us even noticing.
Like we're living inside this tech infrastructure that's also, in some ways, using us. Interfaces aren't just screens, they're lenses. Algorithms aren't just recommending, they're like architects designing our day.
And our data isn't just information. It's the baiting blocks for these environments that then adapt to us, potentially reshaping us in the process.
It's like the error you said. You only notice it when it's gone or when you try to step outside of it. But this digital environment, for all its convenience, can actually work against our individual sovereignty, our freedom to act.
Because it's designed for smoothness, for optimization. And that often comes at the cost of our ability to make truly independent choices, to embrace doubt, to slow down,
Which leads to that paradox. The interface makes us feel in control.
while actually narrowing our real range of options. We see curated choices, but the curation itself limits us. We connect easily, but platforms often amplify conflict. Endless information, but often endless distraction.
So the source suggests the only real sovereignty left is to deliberately create friction, to slow down when everything pushes us to speed up.
Yeah, to resist the immediate reaction, to be willing to step away, even though the system assumes constant engagement.
It's not about smashing the machine then, but fundamentally changing our relationship to it, moving from just living in it to actively trying to shape our own space within it.
Exactly. Understanding how this ecosystem works, its underlying logic, its goals, that's the crucial first step if you want to navigate it without getting completely swept away.
And this highlights another paradox. This environment makes us feel maybe more connected, even powerful sometimes, but it might actually be restricting our independent actions. So resistance isn't a head-on fight.
Probably not a winning one anyway. It's more about finding the cracks, the escape routes, the little pockets of autonomy within the design itself.
So that key point again. Sovereignty is about recovering friction, slowing down, questioning the seamlessness, embracing the messiness that optimization tries to eliminate.
And becoming really conscious of the environment itself, how it guides us, like architecture channels movement in a building, understanding that infrastructure is key to regaining some autonomy.
Because the real danger isn't just that our options are limited, but that we might not even notice. You can't miss what you've never known.
Precisely. And you can't question a reality if you've never glimpsed an alternative.
Mhm.
Sovereignty here isn't just deciding what to do, it's recognizing how much has already been decided for you.
Every prediction, every suggestion, what to watch, listen to, I think it's subtly narrowing our world, filtering out the unexpected, the things that don't fit our pattern.
And the longer we're in it, the more normal those boundaries feel.
Yeah.
Which raises that fundamental question. Who are we when our identity is constantly being refined by a system optimized for engagement and predictability?
If tech is the environment, resistance means finding ways to perceive beyond its built-in limits, to see what the algorithm decided we shouldn't.
But how do you do that? How do you know if you still have genuine autonomy if the environment itself shapes your desires? It's easy to feel free when the choices presented seem good enough.
When the interface makes you feel like you chose, even if you just followed the easiest path.
Exactly. How do you question a system when your ability to question might already be operating within its logic? What if your dissatisfaction is just managed by the interface? Another predictable pattern.
Like, even your desire to disconnect gets turned into a feature, an app reminding you to take a break.
Right. The system anticipates your escape attempts. When it becomes truly pervasive, it doesn't need force. It just surrounds you with convenience, making alternatives seem difficult, unappealing, almost unthinkable.
So the goal isn't just containment, but making the idea of leaving unimaginable. That, the source suggests, might be the final frontier of sovereignty.
Okay, let's dig into how digital power is structured. This idea of networks, nodes, and influence. It's definitely not flat, is it?
Not even close. The city analogy's good. Some streets are major arteries, others are quiet back alleys. Power isn't spread evenly online.
We're nodes in a network, and our connections really determine our clout, our sovereignty in that space. Every network has this underlying architecture that dictates who gets heard, who acts as a filter.
And it's not just about having followers, is it? It's about being strategically positioned. Being one of those nodes information has to flow through, a bottleneck.
Yeah, some people or accounts become these crucial hubs, maybe not because they're the most original, but because they occupy a prime location in the network's geography. Power isn't just creating info, it's controlling the flow, deciding what gets seen.
And the structure tends to reinforce itself, right? The influential get more influential because algorithms favor them, they bridge communities. Visibility attracts more visibility.
It's a digital Matthew effect. And those on the edges tend to stay there, not necessarily because their ideas are bad, but because they just don't have access to the main highways. The system itself amplifies some and mutes others.
But the really tricky part is the illusion of equality. The interface makes it look like everyone's got the same shot, any post could go viral. This myth of the digital town square.
When underneath, it's deeply hierarchical. Connections are currency. A retweet from a mega account is worth infinitely more than one from an unknown. But the system masks that disparity. It's a subtle form of control because the illusion discourages questioning the structure.
And the platform design itself shapes the conversation. If algorithms optimize for interaction and keeping people hooked.
Then conflict, outrage, simple messages often win out over nuance and complexity. Ideas that don't fit the format get penalized by the medium itself. They become invisible not because they're wrong, but because they can't compete in an ecosystem built for speed and reaction.
So how can we talk about reliable information when visibility depends on these opaque algorithms and constantly shifting rules we don't control? The real power game is in engineering the circuits, not just the content.
It's about who decides if something becomes a recognized fact or just vanishes into the data stream. But the problem is also perceptual. If power is invisible networks and subtle tweaks, how do you resist what you can't even see?
Especially when the system is designed to feed you what it thinks you want, reinforcing your biases until your bubble feels like the whole world. How do you know if you can still genuinely change your mind, or if the algorithm just decided it was time for a slight shift in your feed?
And that's the deepest level. This geometry doesn't just structure information, it shapes how we think. We become products of the system that classifies and segments us.
Leading to hyperfragmentation, these sealed-off bubbles where debate isn't even possible because people inhabit different realities.
Exactly. Which leads to the really naughty question. If our perception is shaped by these networks, can we ever truly see them from the outside? Is our understanding of reality itself just a product of these structures? Can we even tell the difference between power and its absence anymore?
The digital network often gets described using that rhizome metaphor, decentralized, no hierarchy, ideas flowing freely.
Right, Deleuze and Guattari. It suggests this open, constantly evolving system, but the source argues that's mostly just the surface image.
Because a true rhizome wouldn't really survive in an environment optimized for predictable, profitable traffic.
Probably not. What we often get is more like a simulation of rhizomatic freedom. It looks open, but it's trapped within the logic of engagement and retention. The rhizome gets kind of absorbed and tamed.
So it's not really branching out freely, but more like being guided through a digital maze. It looks connected, but the paths are often predetermined.
Yeah, information doesn't spread just on merit. It spreads based on how exploitable it is for generating clicks and attention. The digital rhizome isn't an open field. It's more like a walled garden. Looks infinite inside, but keeps you circling familiar territory.
So instead of the promised diversity, we get concentration of power in key nodes, amplifying dominant voices, while everything else becomes background noise. The constant churn isn't growth, it's recirculation.
The system modulates how ideas spread, it limits true divergence, it domesticates chaos. A genuinely wild rhizome would disrupt that, break out, open unexpected paths, destabilize the power architecture.
But first, we have to recognize the walls of the garden, even if they're invisible.
Exactly. And the fight for informational sovereignty then becomes a fight for imagination itself. Can we even conceive of what might exist outside this map that subtly confines us? Now let's tackle hyperfragmentation. The source claims it's basically the end of shared reality.
That sounds dramatic.
It is, but the argument is structural. It's not just information overload. It's that we increasingly live in these personalized info capsules. Filtered, tailored reality, creating bespoke versions of the world for each of us.
So truth doesn't vanish, it just splinters into countless incompatible versions.
Pretty much. And it's baked into the architecture algorithms. Maximizing retention means tailoring content, which inevitably reinforces biases and narrows horizons, even while promising infinite access.
So instead of more knowledge, we get less common ground.
That's the paradox. Meaning used to be negotiated collectively within some shared framework. Now that framework is dissolving. Consensus becomes almost impossible, not because of disagreement, but because we're starting from entirely different informational premises.
And this isn't an accident. It's a feature, not a bug.
The source argues it is. Segmentation is profitable. Niche audiences are predictable. Platforms have little incentive to create broad shared spaces. Echo chambers are better business.
The political and social fallout seems huge. Public debate becomes unviable if everyone's living in a personalized algorithmic reality. Conflict isn't about differing views on shared facts, but clashes between different worlds.
And here's the deep irony. This total atomization doesn't necessarily disperse power. It can actually help consolidate it invisibly. If everyone's in their own bubble, no one's strong enough collectively to question the overall framework.
So big tech doesn't need to push one narrative. They just control the parameters within which all the personalized narratives get generated.
Exactly. What used to be a public square is now a mosaic of disconnected universes. Building collective movements gets incredibly hard when there's no shared understanding of the problems. Power doesn't need crude censorship. It just needs to ensure no cohesive opposition can form.
So information is everywhere, but shared knowledge is fragile. Sovereignty isn't just access, it's navigating this deliberately confusing, fragmenting environment.
And the biggest challenge might just be remembering that something exists beyond our own feed, our own bubble.
The real trick of hyperfragmentation is how smooth it is, right? It feels like freedom, like personalization, not isolation.
Absolutely. It taps into that Lipovetsky idea of postmodern society, less grand narratives, more individualistic, superficial experiences. Freedom becomes avoiding discomfort, not exploring difference.
And Bauman's liquid modernity fits here, too. Everything fluid, temporary, disposable.
Including shared truths. Connections are fleeting, identities shift, nothing solidifies. Disconnection feels like choice, not loss. Collective debate dissolves because the collective itself is liquefied. No shared reality because reality is atomized.
Which raises that critical question, do we even want shared reality anymore? Hyperpersonalization feels like sovereignty, but maybe it's the opposite, just selecting from prepackaged options within our bubble.
We have thousands of contacts, but maybe less real connection. Bauman's point is chilling. In this liquid world, resistance struggles to solidify. Attempts at shared understanding get swallowed by the fragmenting system. Conflict becomes moot without common ground. We're like ships passing in the night, each in our sealed compartment, thinking we're captain of our own destiny.
So resistance means questioning the architecture, not just the content. Because arguing truth versus fiction is pointless across different universes.
Precisely. Rebuilding some shared reality, however difficult, becomes paramount. Lipovetsky's aesthetic individual meets digital fragmentation, politics as entertainment, activism as performance, identity as a collage of stimuli. The battle is sensory, not rational. Power captivates, doesn't convince. Virality beats truth.
Hyperfragmentation hasn't just dissolved shared reality, it's maybe undermined the very possibility of building it. This post-mass society is total dispersion.
Yeah, and the critical point. In a world with no informational anchor, meaning becomes an endless war of perceptions, attempts to build stable narratives get sabotaged by the system itself. What emerges is a society of instant affect, where power is just imposing presence in the endless flow. Now let's shift to this really striking idea, the algorithmic resolution of World War III.
Okay, that definitely grabs your attention.
The argument is that our classical idea of war armies, territory is becoming secondary. World War III, in this view, is already underway. It's a conflict of systems fought with code, data flows, disinformation, algorithms exploiting vulnerabilities.
So it's not about seizing land, but about administering realities, winning through control, not force.
Exactly. The battlefield is computational. Algorithms are the new generals. It's invisible operations at the speed of data. Think mass surveillance, AI spotting anomalies, platforms modulating emotions.
Traditional warfare logic, direct confrontation, gets replaced by reconfiguring the context, programming the environment so the other side's options just disappear.
Right. Algorithmic war is competition between control architectures, data infrastructures, vying to define what can be known and done. Physical conflicts become almost like side effects of this deeper struggle for informational and epistemological sovereignty, the power to define reality itself.
But this hasn't gotten rid of the traditional arms industry, has it?
No, not at all. It's repositioned it. Weapons are still big business, but their function now includes ensuring relevance in a world where power also flows through narratives and digital infrastructure.
So it's less about wars for things and more about wars to keep the war industry itself going, even as power shifts digital. Cyber militarization, AI weapons, it's a new market layered on the old one.
You could say the old industry needs conventional conflicts to keep simmering to justify the physical hardware in a digital war world. These conflicts consolidate positions, keep the money flowing.
But the real war, the source argues, is for information control, creating tech dependencies, setting future standards.
That seems to be the core idea. While troops move, the underlying victories are maintaining fear as a control system and sustaining the broader arms market, which now includes influence systems and control infrastructures. The product isn't just a missile, it's an informational power architecture.
War doesn't need old justifications. It's legitimized by the structure that sustains it. The military-industrial complex goes algorithmic.
And this brings a huge challenge. Traditional war had rules, conventions, however flawed. Algorithmic war operates in a legal and ethical gray zone.
Accountability dissolves into the code, no declarations of war, just continuous optimization and perception management.
Exactly. WWIKI becomes a data war. Predicting and modifying behavior at scale is the new strategic weapon. States fight to avoid tech dependency on the platforms managing their digital space.
So national sovereignty is now about preventing internal decisions from being dictated by opaque external algorithms.
And the source suggests many states are already losing this battle. It's not just who has the tech, but who controls the cognitive frameworks for decision-making. The 20th century had the nuclear race. The 21st has the reality control race.
And this war might not end with a treaty, but just the consolidation of a new informational order?
Maybe. Victory could be structural.
Yep.
A new reality administration so efficient we forget things were ever different.
The source mentions China's approach integrating digital infrastructure for control and legitimacy, achieving a kind of epistemological security.
Yeah, while the West debates control versus exploitation, China's integrated model might offer a strategic edge in this reality war.
Leaving Europe potentially squeezed between U.S. tech dominance and Chinese consolidation.
That's the picture painted. Europe's path, maybe, is developing its own integrated AI management, protecting its cultural diversity, its epistemologies against homogenization.
This ties into bigger ideas, land management, post-capitalism, where victory is integrating AI into a social structure that affirms its own reality.
Essentially, yes. Europe needs a tech model that's a real alternative, fighting on the level of meaning-making. The ultimate 21st century war is for a civilization's ability to define its own reality against autonomous epistemic frameworks.
The world isn't ending with a bang, but a slow reconfiguration until collapse looks like normality. Algorithmic war, digital sovereignty, epistemic battles, they're symptoms of this huge structural shift.
It's not just who governs, but if governing is even possible when AI is the medium itself.
And hanging over all this, climate change. Often pushed aside.
Exactly. While we fight over digital reality, the physical world degrades. Profound irony there.
Climate governance uses similar logic data, prediction, but the ecological crisis doesn't obey algorithms, does it?
Not at all. It has its own logic. So while nations vie for digital supremacy, physical reality might render traditional governance irrelevant. Digital sovereignty means little on a destabilized planet.
No algorithmic war when you're dealing with catastrophe. No dominant epistemologies when survival is everything.
Right. The ultimate conflict might be humanity's control obsession versus a planet operating outside that control.
So, does it matter who wins the digital reality war if material reality collapses?
Maybe the end is realizing we fought the wrong war entirely. Let's move now to the core idea of digital sovereignty itself and this new informational order.
The network path and trap, cage, designed to feel like freedom.
That sums it up well. Harari and Loving talk about platforms augmenting us, but then you have algorithmic mediation shaping decisions. Is that expanded intelligence still ours?
Van Dyke's unconscious technology infrastructure shaping attention without forcing it. Self-domestication.
And Bauman's paradox again. Connection versus control. Hard to tell a network from a fishing net from the inside.
Total digitalization, blurring physical and digital worlds. Social networks don't just reflect society, they define it now.
Like Kundera on narrative not needing logic, reality becomes this algorithmically linked chain, driven by engagement, virality, not necessarily coherence.
The network changes how the world governs itself. Bratton's point about platforms solidifying structures, concentrating power.
Amazon, Apple, Meta, Alphabet, they're beyond companies now. Supranational political economic infrastructure, setting rules, controlling flows, a digital empire.
Jin Ho's platform imperialism maybe doesn't even capture the scale of sovereignty being reshaped. Governments can't really compete with platforms controlling markets and the reality infrastructure.
21st century geopolitics written in code protocols. Who gets a voice, who's invisible? Which raises the urgent question. If platforms are power structures, are we still citizens in the old sense?
Political sovereignty meant state control over territory, community. But if territory is digital, law is proprietary code. Citizenship becomes algorithmic.
Yeah. And you don't need overt censorship if you can just make ideas irrelevant through noise. Don't need to silence dissidents if they can't reach influential nodes.
Absolute control is regulating visibility, memory, forgetting.
The network feels open, but can be a labyrinth pre-traced paths. No single center, but no space outside either. An omnipresent infrastructure shaping things without seeming to impose. Can we even imagine an alternative not built on the same code?
The paradox. Tech-enabled resistance, but also unprecedented surveillance, extraction. The platform empowers and dominates.
The fight for informational sovereignty is right there. Algorithms aren't neutral. Sovereignty is about programming the flow, not just who's nominally in charge.
And recognizing the architecture was often designed for opaque, decentralized power. The battle is in interface design, protocols shaping the landscape before content even appears.
Look at someone like Musk. His power feels structural, almost ontological. He operates where laws seem secondary because he controls critical infrastructure comms, space, AI.
It fundamentally changes the citizen-state relationship. We're nodes in a global network under algorithmic rules, not just political subjects.
Digital citizenship defined by access, platform ecosystems managing identity. What are rights? Free speech if an algorithm deletes you, privacy with a permanent data trail.
Digital sovereignty is the ultimate 21st century battleground for freedom. Not just state power online, but defining the terms of our digital existence. Resisting preconfigured thought, retaining the right to be unpredictable.
Informational sovereignty as defending the space for error, contradiction, things that don't fit. The paradox. More options, less ability to think outside the box.
Harris's point. Users as invisible workers, feeding the system with every click, refining our own cages.
Disabling shared critique, hindering mobilization. It's mass narcotization, not Big Brother watching, but making us forget we're watched.
Constant seduction, tailored info loops. Controlled overload leaves no energy to question.
So how do we see without filters?
Right.
Recover shared reality. Resist a logic that keeps us hooked while telling us we're choosing.
True digital sovereignty might just be seeing what the algorithm hides. Real freedom might be escaping the logic that dictates what we should want.
And this new governance architecture is tied to platform logic. Crisis response depends on these big networks being infrastructuralized. Google, Meta state-level power.
Their tech architecture becomes political, defining what counts as a problem, leading to the manufactured emergency events fitting patterns, trigger responses.
While problems that don't fit the pattern become invisible, restructuring how we even conceive of crisis. Finally, let's look at post-futurism, the social contract, and the role of humans.
The future, once open possibility, now feels optimized, hijacked.
That's the idea. We're variables in a system aiming for efficiency, predictability. Not explorers, but data points. Utopia is a consumer product managed by the platforms selling us identities.
The paradox of post-futurism, the future is just more of the present, streamlined, no big breaks forcing us to imagine alternatives.
Just a continuous flow data, tweaks, recommendations keeping us moving but aimlessly. Post-futurism is technology replacing ideology as history's engine. Conflicts get metabolized by the system.
And the social contract gets rewritten silently. Less citizens, more users of infrastructure. Power is data access.
Humans risk becoming functional appendages, not history subjects, raising the huge question, what is our role? If the future is prediction markets, automation, what's left for us?
The source says the answer means facing that maybe progress as we knew it isn't ours anymore. We're nodes in a system with its own logic.
Escaping isn't nostalgia or technophobia. It's radically reappropriating our relationship with tech. If post-futurism locks us in calculation, the subversive act is recovering the unexpected.
Can't undo interconnection, but can find and use points of friction.
Yeah. The new social contract isn't rules, but a way of existing. Practices to resist simplification, predictability, playing within the system, but with a mindset that escapes its logic. Critical navigation.
Ultimately redefining sovereignty. Freedom isn't choosing preset options, but thinking beyond them. The future feels stolen only if we accept the script unquestioningly.
The fight for human relevance is resisting fitting too perfectly. Our role decided by operational capacity, functional integration into data processing, active versus residual.
The individual as info flow element, not political subject. Work redefined as the integration criterion. Usable people have a place, others become irrelevant.
Reducing life to validation by productive structures. Participation measured by algorithmic compatibility. Non-contributors excluded. Work is the key to recognition.
But crucially, this source says this isn't inevitable. There's potential for participation beyond operational capacity, redefining the social contract beyond work as validation.
Contribution valued socially, culturally, cognitively, independent of exploitability. Creating spaces where life's value isn't just economic utility or algorithmic use. Not rejecting tech, but subverting its logic.
Building a new logic where participation isn't just about profit. Human sovereignty means redefining relevance beyond work and exploitation, affirming life's validity beyond instrumentalization.
The critical point. Not just how much work to save for humans, but can we imagine society where work isn't the only definition of existence? And finally, beyond anthropocentrism, the end of the Superman. A huge shift.
Humanity's belief in its own centrality just isn't holding up anymore.
That's the argument. The modern project built on the Superman, rational, autonomous, mastering nature, justified by progress, that narrative has collapsed.
Post-anthropocentrism isn't abstract, it's material reality. We're tangled in dependencies. We don't control algorithms, ecosystems, tech beyond our grasp. We're nodes, not the center.
The Superman myth becomes parody. Autonomous individual dissolved in hyperconnectivity. Will to power a conditioned response. Transcendence replaced by automation, surveillance. Nietzsche's liberated figure versus this constantly stimulated but impotent monitored being.
The great irony. Pursuing absolute sovereignty led to ultimate dependence on infrastructures, systems, models we can't fully control, yet we cling to the illusion of freedom.
The alternative isn't nostalgia or a new domination narrative. Not replacing man with posthuman. Sovereignty isn't control, it's existence in relation.
Letting go of anthropocentrism means being part of a system without subduing it, renouncing progress as dominance, thinking distributed sovereignty, collective intelligence.
Yeah. Inhabiting the world without needing to possess it, the Superman is dead. Maybe that's good news, opening space for another way of being.
But from the Superman's ruins emerges the Hyperman. Not evolution, but a byproduct of hyperconnection, optimization, acceleration.
Right. The Hyperman is reactive, fused with tech, navigating a perpetual interface condition present, stimulated, but without control over the stimuli.
Not sci-fi post-human, but dissolved in processing networks. Faster, more permeable, but not wiser or freer. He reacts, doesn't act. Superman, will to power. Hyperman, compatibility with the environment. Relevance equals survival.
The Hyperman is a product, existence defined by data generation,
Yeah.
but still biological with limits.
High response, low deep processing, infinite digital experience, fragmented memory, thousands of conversations, losing sovereignty over thought.
Exactly, that tension. Perfect adaptation versus involuntary resistance. Escape isn't full integration or retreat.
It's redefining the relationship, reappropriating limits, knowing when to slow down, disconnect, reclaim thought not dictated by reaction.
Right. The Hyperman is the system's culmination, won't disappear. Sovereignty is deciding how and when to play. Speed isn't always progress. Rebellion can be disappearing.
And the Hyperman isn't alone. Holographic, fragmented consciousness across digital spaces, algorithmically processed, distributed self, defined by data trails.
This collective consciousness generates dispersion, not understanding. Hyperconnection leads to parallel ecosystems. Thought becomes dialogue with a system reflecting a partial image. Mutual surveillance, not telepathy.
Fragmented consciousness affects thought, time, reality, living in independent episodes, reconfigured by interaction, no consolidated memory, just relevant records, fluid identity constantly redesigned.
The danger. Losing sovereignty over thought. Reality is fragmented reflections, believing you're experiencing your own life while trapped in conditioned responses.
Resistance is recovering discontinuity, escaping validation, reappropriating memory, learning to withdraw without vanishing, existing where presence isn't just a calculated reflection.
If Superman was domination and Hyperman is dissolution.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, we've certainly covered a lot of ground today. We've looked at this whole idea of an information war, the power of algorithms and memes, technology becoming our environment, the hidden structures of digital power, and how reality itself seems to be fragmenting.
Yeah, and then the algorithmic view of conflict, the huge complexities around digital sovereignty, this notion of post-futurism where the future feels closed off, and that shift beyond anthropocentrism towards this figure of the Hyperman.
Thinking back to where we started, that image on the train, feeling observed by the network, it really ties so much of this together, doesn't it? The surveillance, the control mechanisms, the constant tension with our own sense of self in this digital age.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And it leaves us with that final, really provocative thought from the source material. If the Superman represents this kind of absolute dominating self, and the Hyperman represents dissolution within the network, is there a third way?
It's a powerful question to sit with. What could that third path possibly look like in this landscape we've been exploring? And what might it mean for our ability individually and collectively to, find our own way forward? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.